Hey everyone, this is Will and welcome to this brand new and exciting episode of The Missing Piece. When the world continues to follow the war in Ukraine at this moment, and of course, given the fact that people are still questioning whether Vladimir Putin is going to ever stop this war and the country of Ukraine will ever be restored and back to normalcy. But meanwhile on the show that we need to take a break from discussing this political and also this economic changes regarding the country of Ukraine. But meanwhile, we need to look at other countries who is also undergoing this tremendous political and social changes at the same time. And how about the country of Lebanon? For so long that we know that this country has been through so much regarding this political and also this economic occupation by other countries, and also internally today, things are not looking quite positive at the same time. So that's why today we need to talk about and we need to discuss how one internal or seems to be one internal accident, it's actually the symbol for this country's defamation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite Dario Sabaghiis. And Dario is a freelance journalist and reporting stories all the way from the Middle East. Dario, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, Will.
You're welcome, Dario. Now, again, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote and is entitled Beirut's collapsing grain silos are a symbol of Lebanon's dysfunction. On one hand, it's understandable that today, when we look at what's happening in each country, again, the countries in Asia, the countries in Europe, of course, many countries in the Middle East. But when we talk about Lebanon, as I mentioned in the intro, this country has been through so much over the decades. I mean, political, socially, and also economic speaking. But within this article, you mentioned, and I want to quote something, that you said, politicians try to hide the evidence regarding this accident, but we are here because people want justice. And that's from one of the protesters. Can you help us? What exactly happened behind the incident, and why are the people today demanding the truth instead of believing it's just one of the accidents?
Sure. Today, Lebanon is facing a rampant economic crisis and political instability, but it's not that it started since 2019, but it takes to many years before that date. So today, the explosion at the port of Beirut that happened on the 4th of August 2020, it has become the symbol of the dysfunction of this state, because on one side, the economic crisis exacerbates the lives of Lebanese. On the other side, the blast represent the corruption, the nepotism, the political instability of the country. In terms of the quote you just mentioned, there is no more contact between people and the political class, which is blamed to be the main responsible of the economic crisis and the political instability in the country. Therefore, there is an opposition between the political class and the Lebanese people. Therefore, there is no more trust, and people in the specific case of the explosion, they want justice, because so far, after 2 years since the explosion happened, that killed more than 200 people and injured more than 6,700 people, there is no accountability for this tragedy. There are ongoing investigations, internal investigations, but are at a stall point. There are stalemate on that. So basically, the people want justice, want to find justice after years and years that people forgot people lost the memory of what happened in Lebanon during the civil war, during the following years, the civil war, and today, where the economic crisis has been affecting Lebanese, not only in financial terms, but on everyday life.
Dario, based on this previous answer that you shared with me, one thing, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that the people in Lebanon, so the Lebanese, could no longer trust the government. Now, let me ask another simple question on behalf of viewers. How much do you think the government is aware this mistrust between the people and the government today? So in other words, we know that today there could be many reasons for people not to trust the capabilities and also the financial support from the government. But when we talk about this social or societal stability, if the government can no longer be trusted by the people, how much do you think that the government actually aware of this issue, and has the government taken any necessary steps to restore their trust among the people in Lebanon? Help us understand, Dario.
The government is fully aware of this mistrust of people, is fully aware of this internal clash between citizens and the political elite. But at the same time, we have seen with the last election happening in May that most of political establishment has been re-elected. If you wonder why, there are many reasons. There is a good news for Lebanese people, which is that 13 MPs belonging to Saoura movement, which means a revolution movement starting in 2019, have been elected following those protests. 2 years long protests, almost 3 years long protests, but at the same time, major parties such as Hezbollah, Amal, Free Patriotic movements, Lebanese forces, which are defined as traditional sectarian political parties, have been re-elected. So there hasn't been so much change since the economic crisis erupted in 2019. So the government is fully aware of that, but in terms of taking action, it's not doing anything, because we have seen during the election campaigns that the economic crisis have brought people that belong to sects, to belong to certain parts of Lebanon, have established a kind of trust in terms of the election. What I mean is basically politician bias vote. There have been cases reported some cases as well, that when there is economic crisis, people go ask help to community. The community is led by traditional parties, so there hasn't been too much change regarding this. So far the government has only responded by the force, just clashing with the protesters during these years. Has tried to lift the subsidy of foods, basic needs of people, but at the same time the inflation just ramped up, and it just worsened the situation. In terms of what is doing at the international level, the government is trying to take some help from International Monetary Fund for a recovery package. But in order to do that, it has to implement some crucial legislation, some crucial reforms. And so far, it's not doing anything about that, because now we have been through the election. The government is not yet formed. In October, between end of October and early November, there will be the election of the president as well. So the political establishment is working on that to take a certain kind of calm within the political scenario.
Dario, when we talk about political instability, again, as we mentioned before, on one hand, there will be one major presidential election coming up this year. But meanwhile, when we look at other countries, when we talk about political changes or political instability, many other people would describe some part of the some part of the world as dictatorship. And also some people call it, another countries or many countries in the Middle East or in the Africa continent are being ruled by military powers. And also last scenario, it's even though we have countries, for example, as the United States of America, it's so-called a democratic system. But meanwhile, people begin to see this polarization taking place within the country. So Dario, again, you are based in Lebanon. So I want to ask you the question very simple. Which scenario do you think today it's actually quite fitting into the political system in Lebanon today? Is it polarization? Is it authoritarian system? Is it because military rulers or any other reasons? And what can we expect from this upcoming election in order to see any changes or hopefully any type of modification so that the Lebanese today could feel more trusted or feel more safe within this country?
Sure. Let's start clarifying that the election is not direct election of the president. Lebanon has a power sharing system following the civil war. Therefore, the president is elected by the member of the parliament. So the game is within the parliament itself to decide who will be the next president. And now Lebanon, in terms of what you asked, there is an internal debate of what is Lebanon today. Is a democracy, is an authoritarian system? What can be Lebanon? Lebanon, of course, formally is a democracy. There is, of course, election, but there are separation of powers. But in reality, it's not as simple as I just said. In terms, for example, in justice, there are some kind of incursion of the political establishment within the judiciary system. Also, there is a parallel state which is called Hezbollah, which is a party with a military wing as well that has its own banks, its own institution as well. There is Lebanon has many layers in its country, and but at the same time there is a strong civil society which is fighting to have an actual democracy within the Lebanese system. The Lebanese country, we don't have to forget that many of the actors they are playing now in the Lebanese politics come from the Lebanese civil war, and they played an important role during those years. So some of the civil society players call that mafia states because there are several groups. There are anyone else. There is a kleptocracy. Also has been mentioned as well by describing this country as well. So there are many aspects of the Lebanese country that we cannot define clearly. It's authoritarian. If you ask me if it's full authoritarian, I would say no. But it's a full democracy. I doubt of that in terms of the factual of the facts that I see here in Lebanon. So if we try to balance what we see now, there are many aspects of a Lebanese country, but it's the first stage of democracy, and with the revolution movement that started in 2019, things are slowly changing, but at the same time, people are less hopeful that things change because of the economic crisis that is impacting the Lebanese society in many aspects. For example, young people are just going away from the country, are just leaving the country because it's unbearable for the future to remain here in Lebanon.
Dario, I want to go back to the article again, something that you wrote, and I quote, this is what you wrote. In Lebanon, political accountability has been one of the main demands of the ongoing anti-government protest. The demonstration began in late 2019 as a response to the country's economic crisis that has left more than 80% of the population affected by poverty as of 2021. Now, let's take a step back. When we talk about this economic collapse, given this fact that the whole world is still experiencing, or I want to be careful, is still slowly recovering from this economic slowness because of the pandemic. But meanwhile, when we talk about this deficit, especially this economic gap, within each country across the world, there could be many theories and many facts and many more truths to be told. However, in terms of this economic deficit or this economic gap in Lebanon, correct me if I'm wrong, Dario, this has nothing to do with a pandemic or has little to do with a pandemic. So you are the one on the ground. Help us to understand how terrible or how disappointing is the economic situation today in Lebanon so that the protest, especially among the younger generations, has been generating much greater or louder noises towards the government. So in other words, what are the causes and why the economic deficit is getting so much greater that it began to become worrisome, not only for the people in Lebanon, but also actually can spill over the countries right next to Lebanon?
Sure. So Lebanese financial and economic crisis has very little to do with COVID-19 pandemic. It started in late 2019, actually on October 17, on 2019, the protest started that date. But we can date it back since years before that date. It's so much different from the economic crisis. If I don't get wrong, World Bank has defined the Lebanese economic crisis as one of the worst since the mid of 19th century. It started basically with a Ponzi scheme. In other words, Lebanese bank depositors have been frauded by banks and from the Lebanese state, according to the records of many institutions. The Ponzi scheme basically works in a way that the banks promised high interests in order that clients put money in their banks. And also, we don't have to forget in that date moment, everything disappeared. Also, we don't have to forget that Lebanese economy is almost an all-imported country, which means they don't export much. They import almost all goods they needed. And at the same time, the Lebanese lira, which is the local currency, is back to US dollars. So today we have a multidimensional economic crisis with that affect every sector of the society, starting from the energy, starting from the food security, and going to actually every sector of the country. We have now Lebanese have now different currencies and exchange rates in order to survive in this condition. They have no energy stability. because they don't have oil, they don't have electricity. They import electricity from, for example, Iraq. They are not able to pay for any goods. So in terms of the of this economic aspect, it's so bad the economic crisis that many people are living who can afford to live. And if you consider that now for medium wage of a Lebanese is about $60 per month, and if you add that inflation has gained like 211%. You can imagine how it's living in the Lebanese states. So there are several aspects that we could analyze, but briefly, Lebanese crisis has just ruined the life of many Lebanese in every sector, and it is going worse day by day, because also it hampered also the political shift, the political change, because in this economic situation, even if the government has all the goodwill to recover from the crisis, change politically, it cannot do it because of the economic crisis that is stagnant in the country.
Dario, I want to go back to what I mentioned in the intro. The whole world continues to watch and follow this war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. Of course, that because of the war in Ukraine, that the whole world is facing a lot more major crises. For example, energy crisis and also food insecurity. I realized that within the article, you also mentioned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February and the wheat crisis that followed prompted the Lebanese government to change its plans and to look for alternatives for grain storage to address food insecurity. Now, again, as you mentioned before, the economic crisis has already taken a toll on the people. Now, on top of that, when we look at the war in Ukraine, that kind of adding the salt to the wound, don't you think? So in other words, if the Lebanese government, or perhaps has the Lebanese government changed the strategy in order to fix the gap or fix the issue in terms of the food insecurity or this energy crisis, how has the government done anything to make it worse for the people in Lebanon? And has it been very effective, or we're still looking for hopes in the long run?
Sure. As I mentioned before, Lebanon export all of the goods, including wheat. So following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, Lebanese were worried about the fate of the wheat they import from Ukraine. We don't have to forget Lebanon imports around 80% of goods from Ukraine. And the wheat in Ukraine basically is grown in south and east of the Ukrainian territory, which are the what is the actual the confrontation between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army. So of course there was a worry. There was worry among Lebanese. We have seen an increase of price of wheat in Lebanon. Also, the sunflower oil, which is imported from Ukraine itself, and but at the same time, Lebanon has had some storage in Tripoli and Beirut, so they could afford something at the beginning. But now there is a food instability, with instability actually, for that as well, because they have no money for buying more wheat from other countries, because would be become expensive. That's not just about a Lebanon condition; it's also a condition of the other Middle East country. For example, Egypt relies on Ukraine wheat, and also those countries North Africa as well, like for example, such as Tunisia. Now Lebanon has requested some funds from the World Bank and IMF to support to buy wheat, but internally Lebanon has little done with that. So we have been facing some strikes from the bakeries unions from this increase of price, and there's a lack of wheat itself. So the situation is going worse also on this particular aspect of food stability.
Dario, I know you are very busy. Stay with me. I got 2 more questions before letting you go. Now, let's go back to your article. Again, as we mentioned before, those silos really serve as memorial to the victims. And this is something that you also wrote, and I quote, "A memorial is needed to remember the tragedies such as the Berlin Wall Memorial or the memorial as Hiroshima. But meanwhile, the Lebanese architect who collaborate with the victims of the families, again, because the collapse, that actually brought much greater sadness and also this a devastation to the families." But going back to the beginning of the conversation, if we can interpret such collapse as the dysfunction of the Lebanese, how could people find hope in this country in the long run? So in other words, for example, when we look at some of the countries who are also undergoing this major political and also this economic uncertainty, many people, they just left. So in other words, this is a very simple way, right? I just pick up my things, I just leave the country. But meanwhile, I believe some people or majority of the citizens are still maintain hopeful and positive and hoping that this government can redirect the country into the right path or onto the right path. How likely is going to happen that the government can realize that it's time to put people back on the right course so that the country is going to grow, it's not going to become, in other words, a disappointment for the citizens?
Sure. Some people have left, as you just mentioned. Some people cannot afford to live. So there are some people in Lebanon that even if they want to live, they cannot afford economically. That's why Lebanon is right now facing a crisis of migrants, of Lebanese and Syrian migrants going away from Lebanon through via sea. So there are smuggling to Cyprus or to Turkey or Greece to live in Lebanon that way. And some other people don't want to leave because they have roots here, and that's pretty understandable. They want to continue to fight. There are other people that don't want to live because it's their house here, their lands. Many Lebanese have lands here. Also, there are people that they have just become hopeless, but at the same time they live day by day because they don't know what to do. But in terms of the Salo story itself is pretty symbolic because people still want to fight. They still have hope in not in the Lebanese government, but in the Lebanese people. So that's why they still continue to fight to have a justice. Because if not for them, the explosion will be forgotten, as it was forgotten the civil war or other story that happens in between. So for them, it's really important keep the silo, to which, by the way, the northern section has just collapsed entirely just last week. So just the south section, which is more stable, has remained, and they want to protect it and preserve. Sorry, in order to remind all Lebanese what happened and what the government did according to them, as they blamed the government itself as the main responsible of the disaster. And at the same time, the government is trying to push further to cancel this kind of memory from the minds of Lebanese, because the tension are growing, and Lebanese. When I said that Lebanese are against the government, I don't mean all the Lebanese. So there are part of the Lebanese that are against the government. There are other that support the traditional political parties because of the power sharing system, the community unity that there is when there is such economic crisis like today. The first thing they go to ask, the first people they go to ask help are the traditional parties for vote exchange or for any kind of help from any kind of favor that could happen. So the response of the Lebanese government, I don't think it will be much different as has been done so far.
Dario, I want to wrap up our conversation by going back to something very simple. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, you are a journalist and you travel extensively among the countries in the Middle East. And we know that today, the countries in the Middle East today are gaining much more attention, not only for the countries in the West, but also for many more major, larger economic partners. Now, the last question, again, is very simple. What does that mean to bring democracy back to Lebanon? So in other words, how should we interpret the word democracy today in the country of Lebanon? Is it just more than political freedom? Or it's actually something much deeper that we need to, particularly the people who are not familiar with what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in the countries in the Middle East today, that the definition of democracy has been elevated into the next level?
Democracy in Lebanon could have many meanings for people. It depends who you ask. Today, as we know, the democracy as power to the people, free election, separation of power, this is not the case of Lebanon. As I mentioned before, Lebanon is, in my opinion, is an early stage of the democracy, the democratic process to become an actual democracy, which is very difficult to achieve in such a kind of situation. Also because Lebanon has a community with many people that belong to different religions, to different kind of communities and political opinions. So for now, for Lebanon, democracy is, first of all, I think, for the part of Lebanese, finding a justice, seeking a justice for what happened for the silos, what happened for the economic crisis, for the political instability. First of all, I think, in my opinion, that means democracy for Lebanese right now.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Dario Sabaghiis. And again, Dario, it's a freelance journalist that he travels extensively around the countries in the Middle East. And of course, I strongly encourage everyone to go online, look for his amazing article and called "Beirut's Collapsing Grain Silos Are a Symbol of Lebanons Dysfunction. Dario, thank you so much for taking your time to join the show. And again, we really appreciate that your hard work and also your insights all the way on the ground. And we pray, brother, you're going to be safe and sound as we continue to hear from you and read your upcoming stories, not only about Lebanon, but also the countries across the Middle East. Thank you, Dario. And brother, stay safe.